Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, is Donald Trump tax reform a scam on the poor? Our guest, Dean Baker, co-director of CEPR, the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Dan Baker, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
Dan, do you agree the criticism that Donald Trump's tax reform could be a scam on the poor?
Well, it's certainly a very, very big gift to the rich, and it's fair to say there's pretty much nothing in there for the poor. So one of the items they have in there is a child tax credit, or raising a child tax credit. We already have that now. It's $1,000. They raise it to $1,600. You might say, well, that's a good thing. It is, except it's not refundable. So when you look at more moderate income people, say a mother with 2 kids who's earning, say, $15,000, $20,000 a year, they won't get anything from that because they're not paying enough income taxes to qualify to get any additional money through that. So the people who need that most don't benefit from it. So there's very, very little here that benefits low-income people. Now the problem is there's a lot of aspects of it that may turn around and hurt low-income people. So while they don't directly cut programs that benefit lower-income people, they do many things that are likely to hurt them down the road. So among other things, this does increase the deficit. You're taking less revenue, means you have a larger budget deficit.
Bernie Sanders, one of the hard critics of this tax reform, says in highlights, 80% of the reduction of tax reductions are going to go to the 1%. 40% of the tax reduction is going to go to 1/10 of 1%, and 1/3 of the middle class is going to get his taxes increased. You think it's about right?
Yeah, I mean, he's referring to numbers that come out of several objective sources with tax policy centers, well established here, nonpartisan. They have Republicans and Democrats on there. I believe that's the numbers he's citing, but the Joint Tax Committee of Congress, which again is nonpartisan, came out with similar numbers. So what they've done here is they've reduced high-end tax rates, they've reduced the corporate income tax, but they've taken away a lot of deductions that middle-income people benefit from. I'll just give you one example. As it stands now, the money that I pay in income taxes to state and local income taxes here in DC or California, New York, you pay a state income tax, not everywhere, but in those states you do. That currently is deductible from your federal taxes. That will no longer be the case. So a lot of middle-income people benefit from that deduction. They'll no longer be true. And here's again where it can turn around and hit the poor. When you're in a state, let's say California, at high-end earners, their tax rate on high-end earners is somewhere in the order of 10%. Now, if they could deduct that from their income tax, the federal government, in effect, picks up a large chunk of that. That will no longer be true.
And you were mentioning the corporate tax reductions will be permanent, and you have said individual tax reduction will be limited to 8 years.
That's right. So they had set a target how much they were going to raise the deficit, $1.5 trillion. And to meet that, what they said, we want corporate tax cuts to be permanent, but we have some individual tax cuts in here that go to middle class people. Those phase out after 8 years.
Talking about, for example, what is called also the individual mandate that has been established by Obamacare. That has been phased out, and we're talking that 15 million to 20 million, depending on the source, could be losing healthcare insurance.
That's right. So as it stands now, they require people, this is part of the Affordable Care Act that President Obama pushed through, people are required to have insurance. And 2 things go on here. One is more healthy people might decide not to get insurance. They might say, I'll take the risk. They don't have a lot of money, they'll take the risk. So some people go without insurance, kind of their choice. The impact of that is you have less healthy people in the pool. That makes the insurance premiums go up. So fewer people could afford it. The other thing that goes on, and this is really kind of tragic, you have a lot of people that would qualify for the free government Medicaid program. They're not going to sign up because they don't have to. They don't know it. So as it stands, when you have the mandate, they go, oh, I have to get insurance, I don't want to get a fine, and then they apply for it and they go, oh, you can get it free. Well, they aren't going to do that.
So if you should, in one phrase or two, summarize the first years of Donald Trump in terms of inequality, what impact is having that in the inequality in America?
Well, basically, he's trying to give as much money as possible to those at the very top, and the tax reform or tax cuts are very much a part of that because it gives very little to most people and a lot to those at the top.
So the inequality is increasing, or the tendency is to increase?
Well, it will. I mean, it hasn't passed yet, but yes, that clearly is what's going to come from this.
The other side of the story, the market is booming, and these are your words. To say that things are going in the right direction now doesn't mean they are going good. But it's important that people recognize that the economy is going in the right direction for now. This is the economy that Janet Yellen and Barack Obama policies gave us. And you conclude, we will have to see what the impact on the new regime's policy will be.
Yeah, the economy always has a lot of momentum. So you get Donald Trump takes office in January, things don't change immediately. So we actually had an economy that was growing at a decent pace, and most importantly, it was creating a lot of jobs. So we have the unemployment rate down now to 4.1%. We've only been one time since 1970 that's been the case. 2000, we also had the same rate. And you're actually seeing good wage growth at the middle and bottom of the wage ladder. So to my view, it's a pretty good story right now. It doesn't make up for all the bad things that happened in the Great Recession or the 3 decades of wage stagnation before that. But for now, at least, things are going in the right direction for those at the middle, those at the bottom.
The people who do not believe in that tax reform presented as it is argue is historically, and among them are Bernie Sanders, historically, the tax reduction didn't translate in job creation. Is that true?
Very much true. So the argument that the Trump administration is giving is we're going to give all this money to corporate America, there'll be this big flood of investment, and that will benefit everyone because they're going to hire more people, they'll be more productive.
They trickle down in a way.
Exactly, that's the argument. And you go, look, we've tried this. Both under George W. Bush, there was a big tax cut targeted primarily towards the wealthy, and in '86, under President Reagan, there was a big cut in corporate income taxes. Investment actually fell. It's one of the remarkable stories. I don't know why this isn't more widely cited. So we cut our corporate income tax from 46% to 35%. That's a pretty big cut. And the next 2 years, investment actually fell. I'm not going to say it was because of the tax cut, but obviously there was no boom.
So not necessarily is a done deal. It's a truth by itself, as Donald Trump tried to present it.
There's overwhelming evidence the other way. I mean, it just, I'd be very happy if that happens, but I just don't see any reason to believe it.
Is there a possible impact in the job market, the massive deportations of undocumented immigrants, and eventually what is trying to see the increase in the minimum wage that has been stagnant for decades?
Well, in terms of the impact of the deportations, and thankfully thus far there have not been massive deportations, but there are deportations, and certainly Donald Trump has said he wants massive deportations, so I don't rule out that will happen. That will create disruptions. I mean, there's a view that some people have that immigrants are displacing U.S. workers, and undoubtedly that's true here and there, but the impact clearly is very small. But if you just say, okay, we have all these workers in industries like hotels, restaurants, and we're going to take a lot of them out, well, that's going to cause massive disruptions. Some businesses will go out of business because they can't easily replace those workers. So in terms of, can you envision that would help U.S. workers, that's pretty hard to see. So just on the economics, I'm not talking about the morality. I mean, in many of these cases, people have been here 10, 15, 20 years, have families, they have very deep roots. So just taking them out of the country, I think, is pretty hard to justify in any sort of moral sense. But in terms of the economics, it's going to be overwhelmingly a negative impact if you do that. We haven't seen it to date.
One of the figures that the Federal Reserve mentioned regarding this third quarter, July to September, is an increase about 3.3% of the U.S. economy. I don't know if you manage the same figure. So the question is, if the economy is growing and is doing well, why the minimum wage is not being increased to, for example, $15 an hour?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. We last raised the minimum wage in 2007. Well, it was in 3 steps, so the last hike went in place 2009.
So a decade ago.
Yeah, that's right. And we've obviously had a lot of inflation, a lot of productivity growth over that period. It used to be, if you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, the minimum wage kept pace with productivity growth. If it had continued to do that, it'd be around $19, maybe even $20 an hour today. So we're way below where we were, say, 50 years ago relative to productivity in the economy. So yes, we should certainly be raising minimum wage. One point about here that's important for people to realize, many states have done that. So California's raised its minimum wage. I forget where it is exactly today, but it's scheduled to be $15 an hour by 2022. New York also, something similar. So we do have many states in the country where they are raising the minimum wage, but it is an outrage that they haven't done it nationally, and we've allowed it to fall so far behind inflation and productivity.
When you are watching this show from Latin America, the impact that could possibly, or it is having the U.S. economy regarding the region, how would you measure it?
Well, historically, the U.S. has been, well, two things. One, obviously, it's a large market for Latin America. But the other thing is you've had a lot of immigrants, a lot of people emigrating from particularly Mexico and Central America. They've gone to the U.S. for jobs, and it's been very, very important for their economies. And again, I know certainly it's a big risk, apart from the humanitarian issues, it's a big concern that, if there were a mass deportation, you would see large numbers of people coming back to, Mexico, to Honduras. Would be very difficult for those countries to deal with.
I'm talking about also the salaries of the CEOs.
Yeah, this is something the U.S. has had an impact on worldwide. So we've seen an explosion in CEO pay in the United States. So CEOs are always well paid. We can understand that.
The chief executive
Chief executive officers, yeah, they've always been well paid. But if you go back, look at the ratios of their pay to an ordinary worker. In the 70s, it was 20 or 30 to 1. Today, you're looking at 200, even 300 to 1. It's very common for a CEO of a major company to get 15, 20 million, even 30 or 40 million. And that has an impact throughout the world because where you have, let's say, someone who's established themselves as a good executive running a company, it could be in Latin America, Europe, Japan, and they say, well, if we went to the United States, we'd get 20 million. So you have to pay us 3 million, 5 million, 10 million. So it puts upward pressure on CEO pay throughout the world.
And some of them, what is ironic, if you want, the performance is cutting jobs in their companies, big time, and then when they're fired, they receive sort of a golden parachute.
This is one of the things that I've had arguments with people about, because I go, okay, let's accept that, okay, these people are incredibly talented or whatever. Why don't you pay them based on that? And if they do well, fine. But if they do poorly, why do you give them huge amounts of money? There was a CEO who headed up Home Depot, a big department store chain, a few years back, and their stock plummeted, their profits plummeted. He got $240 million when he was fired.
So that is a reward.
Yeah, yeah. It's treat them like other workers. If you do your job poorly, well, you're out the door. But in this case, when you're out the door with $240 million.
And then, if you're watching this interview from other parts of the world, we're seeing that the inequality is very strong. There are figures, for example, from the International Monetary Fund that between 2008 and 2013, 2008, the year of the financial crisis, 95% of the profits of the U.S. economy went to the 1%, and 90% of the population get at least same level or poorer. So inequality is very, very, very well and alive. Why do the American population, the ones who are hurting, Donald Trump saying that is not the case, but Bernie Sanders is saying yes, since the last 40 years the middle class is going downhill. Why is not reacting politically? And we're talking Noam Chomsky that say in this country there are not two political parties, there's one political party, the business party. How the population, the masses, is not reacting to the loss of the quality of living?
Well, I think it's difficult for them to react, or react perhaps I should say in an intelligent way. So you had a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump. He's out there, he's going to make America great again. He's going to bring back the jobs they lost. Now, part of this was...
That's a promise, yeah.
That was a promise. He's going to beat up China. He's going to beat up Mexico. We got bad deals with them. He's going to bring back good-paying jobs. I think some people believe that. It didn't make any sense. He doesn't have any clear way to do it. I think 90% of the time he doesn't know what he's talking about. But you did have people believe that. On the Democratic side, I think they do offer more for working people. I mean, you have things like the Affordable Care Act, which did extend health care insurance, but people also look, President Obama's in office, and how many bankers went to jail? 0. So, I understand. I mean, I would still tell someone you're much better off having President Obama there than Donald Trump, but at the same time, is he the enemy of Wall Street? It's kind of hard to see that.
And do you see that is a moment, or we have more possibilities to have a third party being present in the next election?
I don't see a third party getting anywhere. I mean, the logic of our electoral system makes it extremely hard for a third party to get anywhere. So if you look to a parliamentary system, you could have a third party get seats in the parliament, and then they could be part of a coalition and they could have an impact. In our system, a third party is basically throwing away your vote.
Bernie Sanders says this is not a democracy, this is an oligarchy.
You have hugely disproportionate influence of the wealthy because they have so much money, and you know everyone acknowledges this, that if you're running for office you need large amounts of money, and it's extremely difficult. Bernie Sanders actually this is one of the things that's most impressive about his campaign. He raised a substantial amount of money from people sending him $50, $100, $200, what middle income people could do, not the millions of dollars that the Wall Street types would throw at the the major party candidates.
Then the people who are skeptical regarding what they call it disregard for environment during the presidency of Trump believes that behind is a clear mandate of the business to keep things the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, this has been bizarre, I guess I would say. It's almost like a matter of principle with these people to destroy the environment. So first off, right off the bat, Donald Trump says he's pulling out of the Paris Agreement on global warming. So we don't care about it. He's called it a hoax. I mean, one of the bizarre things at one time during his campaign.
A Chinese hoax.
Chinese hoax. Well, China's doing more than anyone to push electric cars and solar power. Yeah, hugely, hugely. More than, I mean, and I saw data recently, I think they have more solar power installed than the rest of the world combined. So I guess they fooled themselves on this. But in any case, he's, right off the bat, we're not going to do anything to promote reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, just to be clear to people, many states still are doing that. So California, New York, many states still have good policies to try to promote clean energy and conservation. But at the federal level, he's doing everything to reverse that. On top of that, though, he's really made a point of trying to reverse all sorts of environmental regulations where there's almost no economic benefit, in the sense like it's not going to somehow make goods cheaper for us. It's not going to mean we'll have more gas or anything. It's just like almost as a matter of principle. Just today, in fact, it was reported he's going to cut back the size of these national monuments, protected areas in the state of Utah. And again, you go, what's going to be the value in that? I mean, I'm sure there will be some drilling for oil or other minerals there. But it's not as though we need that. It's not as though there's some huge amount of oil. No one thinks that. So it's very, very marginal, and you're jeopardizing these really beautiful, natural, pristine areas.
And he was trying to defend the coal industry.
Yeah, and this is, again, kind of amazing. We lost a huge number of coal jobs, for decades, and the overwhelming reason was it wasn't even environmental regulation, it was productivity growth. And this happened long, long ago. We had 500,000 people employed in coal mining back in 1950. That was down to about 100,000 by the 80s. So that was when we lost most of the coal mining jobs. We're currently down around 50,000. This is in a labor market of 150 million. So the number of jobs in coal mining is just not a big deal. But he's made it this big principle. We're going to push coal mining, ignoring that it's horrible both in greenhouse gas emissions and also just all sorts of other pollutants. There's a lot of good data on this that we benefited enormously from reducing our use of coal.
And the clean energy is creating more jobs than the coal industry.
Coal industry, as I say, 50,000. Green energy, I mean, even very narrowly, just looking at solar, it's well over 100,000 now. You throw in wind, we're over 200,000. So the number of jobs that are out there in clean energy just dwarfs anything you could hope to do in the coal industry.
What is your reaction to the perception that in the U.S. economy, the military industry, the war industry is almost the backbone of the economy?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, they're an important industry, but the military, I mean, the military is still huge, but, if you compare, I'm old enough to remember the Cold War days, the military was 6-8% of GDP. Today, we're about 3.5, 4. I mean, we're a huge economy, so it's still a very, very big sector, and they're very powerful industries, but it's not as though our economy is dependent on them. So you do have powerful industries that stand to benefit enormously if, say, Trump were to have more of a military buildup, which he wants. They'll benefit, but that's not necessary for the economy.
Talking about precisely what he's proposing, $54 billion increase, about 10% increase regarding the last year. And in the meantime, he's cutting social programs and also, for example, the budget of the State Department. More military and less diplomacy and less social programs. Worrisome?
Very worrisome. This is someone who's been very belligerent against certainly Iran and North Korea. And he's firing people, he's getting rid of people who have experience in diplomacy, and you really do worry. I mean, he may actually want a war, which, you know, is bad news, but even, I don't know, more frightening, but he may stumble into one where he doesn't want it, but because of failure of diplomacy, we end up in an armed conflict that even he doesn't want.
So who's really running the country? Because there are a lot of people who wonder if Donald Trump knows what he's doing regarding many fronts: economy, diplomacy, environment.
It's very, very hard to see. I mean, I think in a lot of cases you have, say, powerful cabinet secretaries. I think in defense we were sort of fortunate. John Mattis, I'm not going to say he's like my hero or anything, but he's a reasonable person, and he's also someone who's indicated he won't let Trump push him around. So in the scheme of things, in a Trump administration, I'm very happy to see him at Defense Department. In some of the other departments, it's total chaos. He had picked his Secretary of Housing was, I'm forgetting his name now, is the Dr. Carson, who ran against him in the primaries. Literally no background whatsoever, has no, both in housing but also in running a large bureaucracy. So it's total chaos there. So a lot of the agencies of government are just almost falling apart at this point.
Do you see any concern between what we have seen at the moment is sort of a divorce between Donald Trump and the Republicans in the Congress?
Well, they clearly were never exactly in line, and I'm sure the Republicans in Congress are looking at the polls very, very carefully, because at least the House of Representatives is all up for re-election in 2018, and 1/3 of the Senate is. So they have to face voters, and if people are sufficiently concerned, worried, think Donald Trump isn't rational, they will take it out on the Republicans in Congress, and a lot of them will be defeated. If they get very concerned about that, we do have mechanisms through which the president could be removed. He could be impeached, and there's also a more technical one.
Do you think that it could happen?
I think it's a very, very plausible scenario, because I think he's likely, you know, there is a special prosecutor looking at his involvement with Russia during the campaign. I don't have details on that, but I think it's very plausible he's committed crimes, and if the special prosecutor finds that—
Like obstruction of justice?
Obstruction of justice, yeah, firing the FBI director, which seems to have been done, well, I shouldn't say seems. He said he did that because he wanted to stop him investigating Russia connections. So did that amount to obstruction of justice as a legal issue? I can't say, but I think it's very plausible. And if he were to say that there's a crime here, whether he'd indict the president or not, I don't know, but if he were to say that, I think there'd be a lot of pressure on Congress to impeach him.
So, Dean, finally, what will we be paying attention for the rest of Donald Trump's mandate?
Well, I mean, he changes things every day. I mean, you know, first, I'm an economist, so we do want to see what happens with the economy. I mean, I think his tax cut is bad news. I don't think it's disastrous. Big question, I guess I'd say, is what do they look to do with the budget after that? Are they then going to go and try and cut Social Security, Medicare, all these programs that both poor and middle income people are very dependent on?
Finally, what are your plans for the 2018?
Well, my plan's 2018. I'm leaving Washington halfway through. I'm going to be, I guess, semi-retired, moving out to Utah. So that's something I very much look forward to.
But we're going to see you connected in a way to this writing and...
Yeah, no, I'll be continuing to do work. Hopefully a little less than I am today, but I certainly hope to continue to do work.
Well, thanks very much and good luck.
Thank you very much.